So we often hear terms like domestic violence, family violence, or intimate partner violence. What do these terms mean?
Well, that's a great question. One of my frustrations is that we haven't come up with the right term yet to describe this situation of the particular violence and abuse that is experienced in a very gendered way by women, especially within the family. So if we look, for instance, at the terms domestic violence and family violence, there's no gender reference there at all. Those terms are generally used to describe all of the abuse that can happen within a family setting. That could be abuse by one partner of the other. It could be the abuse of a child by a parent. In some cases, it could be an in-law, parents-in-law, who are abusing, say, their son's spouse. It could be even abuse among siblings, or, as we're now understanding increasingly as parents age, abuse by children who are now themselves adults against their elderly parents. So those are kind of generic terms that just say people do bad things to one another within the family context. Intimate partner violence is more specific. Here we're definitely saying it's what one partner does to the other in an intimate relationship. But there's problems with all three of those terms. The first, which I've already kind of alluded to, is that there's no gendering of what's happening. And we know that the most serious forms of violence, and what I include in that category, is both coercive control and lethal violence, is perpetrated by folks who identify as men against folks who identify as women. So all three of those labels fail to identify that. There's another problem with those terms, and it's they all use the word violence. The majority of people, when they hear the word violence, think about physical violence. And of course, that's a serious concern. That's a bad thing to do.
But it's not the only thing going on.
It's not the only thing. And in fact, when I was in practice, women would say to me regularly, you know, I kind of wish he would just hit me, because then people would understand that what he's doing is wrong. But he's being verbally abusive to me. He's calling me names. He's putting me down in front of the kids. He's cutting me off from my friends. He controls all the money. He treats me terribly. And people don't understand that. And so the word violence makes invisible this very serious kind of abuse. It's becoming a little better understood now. It's got a label, coercive control. But I think we still need to come up with a better term to describe this very particular dynamic.
In the spring of 2023, Kingston Community Health Centers issued the Kingston Speaks Inclusion report about the Kingston Police. Community members who were consulted identified the Kingston Police as having a male-dominated culture and expressed concerns about white supremacy and that officers wielded too much power. Do you have any thoughts on the report and its implication for people who experience gender-based violence?
The report is incredibly important right across the board because KCHC went into the communities and talked to people, more importantly, listened to people. So I think everything that's in there is validated by the fact that it comes from people's lived experiences with the police. There's no doubt that Kingston Police, like most police forces, is a male-dominated environment in terms of what it's like for people who work there, but also in terms of how they respond to the community. Over the years that I've done this work, both in Kingston and provincially, we've seen women again and again decline to report to the police because they fear they won't be believed, or because they've reported before and they were not believed, they were treated with disrespect, they were blamed for what had happened to them, all of those kinds of things. And you know, that attitude can come from female officers as well as male officers. It's really more about the institution and the culture within the institution. So this is a matter of really grave concern. I mean, I don't think of the criminal law as the be-all and end-all or the only response a society should have to a problem like intimate partner violence, but it is one of the responses we have, and most people who grow up in Canada are taught that the law is there to protect them. But here we have something that affects approximately 44% of all women in this country.
That's a lot of women.
And many of them, in fact about 2/3 of them, feel that that law and the gatekeepers to that law, the police, are not able to assist them. So that's a problem.
So if the police are not adequately meeting the needs of women or people who experience gender-based violence, what else what other alternatives do you see out there, or community responses that women and others are taking to meet each other's needs?
One of the things I've watched over the last several decades that I find really inspiring is the way survivors have come together to create their own supports, to speak publicly in a way that feels safe to them. I think this is more well understood when we talk about sexual violence. And of course, I'm talking more about intimate partner violence, but let's remember those two things are also interwoven. They're not completely separate from one another.
Of course.
So if we think about the various movements over the last 10 or 15 years where survivors have taken to social media to call out the sexual assault, sexual harassment that they've experienced, we see some of that in the area of intimate partner violence as well. So I think that's one thing that can happen within the movement of survivors. But it's obviously it's more than that. As a community, we have to understand the issue. We have to be ready to believe survivors when they tell us what it is that's happened to them. Within the sort of quasi-criminal system, I think it's imperative that we start to look at alternatives or add-ons, I guess, rather than alternatives, like transformative justice. The criminal system doesn't...
Can you explain what transformative
Sure.
justice means to you?
Let me start by saying the criminal system doesn't actually really help anybody. Most people who cause harm, and I'm not just talking about intimate partner violence here, but most people who cause harm have a background in which they have been harmed. They're people who need to heal themselves. So here we have a system that says it's an adversarial system. You know, if you're the person who's been charged, your goal is to be not found guilty. So what motivation is there for you to say, yeah, I really messed up. I'm really sorry for what I did, and I'd like to get some help so I don't do it again. If I'm the victim, I feel silenced, I feel not heard, I feel disrespected, I feel terrified because now I'm in a courtroom where I have to, in front of you, say everything that you did to me. Transformative justice takes us into a different kind of setting where I get to talk to you in a way that's safe, and there's many ways that this can be designed, so I'm not going to get into that amount of detail. And I can say, you know, when you did this to me, this is how it made me feel. This is the impact that it had on me, on our children, on my job, right? And you have a chance to reflect, because you're not now worried about, is somebody going to say I'm guilty and I have to go to jail? We've taken that off the table. So you can actually reflect on what you did and say, wow, I am sorry. And then we can hook you up with programs that could help you unlearn the behaviors you've been using, that can help you heal from what harm has been caused to you in the past, and set you on your way to be better in the next relationship that you're in.